I can start.
Welcome back, everyone, to the next set of talks in day one, day two, session one. Uh, right now, we have with us Sydney Hyde from the University of Massachussetts, United States, and she will talk about workerless queens and queenless workers, the behavior of the social parasite, Tetramorium atratulum with Tetramorium immigrants in its introduced range. The floor is yours, Sydney.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. My name is Sydney, and today I will be talking about a rare social parasite in its introduced range. This work has been part of my master's project, and I've been working on it in the Kwapich lab. So, I think it would be helpful to start by explaining how I studied the host worker actually and came across the parasite quite accidentally. But I hope that you find it as exciting as I have. And here is workerless queens and queenless workers. So parasitism broadly defines a relationship where one organism benefits at the expense of another. This relationship presents in various forms with a range in dependency. Here are 3 examples of obligate brood parasites across groups like fish, birds, and insects. While there are 53 known cuckoo species that exhibit this form of parasitism, there's only one known fish species that does, and that is the cuckoo catfish. When we look at insects, and especially social insects, we find really interesting strategies and tactics that parasites use to exploit their hosts. As we will see shortly, there are some traits that parasites carry that severely limit their ability to live independently from a host. In a brief introduction to how a typical ant colony functions, each colony consists of one or multiple queens and their non-reproductive daughter workers. Winged male and female sexuals are produced seasonally, and they disperse from their natal nests and participate in mating flights. After mating, males will die and females will shed their wings and find a suitable place to excavate a nest and found a new colony, laying her first worker eggs. As the workers grow and the colony expands, the life cycle repeats and continues until the queen either dies or runs out of sperm that she stored during her mating flight. Here's a social parasite that breaks the rules. This is Tetramorium atratulum, an obligate social parasite that is native to Europe and introduced to North America. They are completely lacking a worker caste, and so only sexuals are produced. And they mate inside the host nest, and often between siblings. In the absence of mature females, the males will even attempt to mate with pupal females. After mating, inseminated female parasites will leave their host nest and seek orphaned colonies of other Tetramorium species to invade, and if they're successful, they will lay their eggs and the host workers will raise the offspring. In North America, the only known host species is Tetramorium immigrans, also known as pavement ant. The image shown here shows the relative sizes of the parasite and their host, Tetramorium immigrans. You can see on the top left just how much smaller the parasite is compared to the host. Right below, labeled C, is the male host species of Tetramorium immigrans, and right next to it on the right is a host worker. The parasites are no bigger than the worker and no bigger than even the gaster of the male. And what's really remarkable is the appearance of the male parasite. It's very different from the typical male ant. It's wingless, it's pale and unpigmented, and it's also described as pupoid-like. And this is in reference to its resemblance to a pupa, as shown by this chromatogaster pupa on the lower left. So as I stated, I started studying Tetramorium immigrans, the pavement ant, in North America with an interest in urban ants and urban ecology. And in studying these ants, where they are well acclimated to urban environments, um, their lifestyle is very interesting, and their introduction history begins with the European settlement in the 17th and 18th century. And so their type locality is in the cracks of pavement or sidewalk, and they form these really large territory battles between neighboring colonies of the same species. So they're really good at detecting who's a nestmate and who's not. They're also monogynous, so they have a single queen, which actually may leave them more susceptible to parasitism. You can even see that in some parts of Europe, Tetramorium immigrans is considered introduced, and it's also introduced in parts of South America. With increasing urbanization, this is something to keep note of. So back to the parasite, Tetramorium atratulum actually parasitizes more species of the Tetramorium genus. And most of these species are located across Europe, widely distributed, as shown by the map. Although they're widely distributed in Europe and have successfully been introduced in North America, they're still considered very rare. In 1996, they were listed as a vulnerable species by the IUCN. And after studying more about this parasite and looking into the literature, I really found that it seems like people are finding these parasites, especially as new records in different countries. And even in North America, shown in the map, you can see that in the state of Colorado, that western state separate from all the eastern states, there are no current known records in the states around that state of Colorado. So currently, the records are distributed in northeastern United States, as well as parts of Canada as well. Massachusetts is a northeastern state in the United States and a state that was settled early on by the Europeans. And currently, there are 2 records of this parasite. However, these records are both on islands. They were found accidentally during ant surveys on these islands. And as I was studying my initial host species in my project, I had found a parasite in my backyard. So this was my study site for the summer of 2022 between July and September. These 2 boxes here show the 2 separate nest entrances where I had found the parasite or found parasites dispersing from. You can see that it's underneath more of rocks and in the cracks of where the driveway meets this really small land strip in my backyard. So as I began to learn more about this parasite and reading about the natural history of the species, I found myself seeing the gaps in the literature and what we know about these parasites. And due to it being so rare and difficult to find, specific mechanisms seem to be left to be clarified. And one of those is, how do these parasites obtain nutrition from host colonies or host workers? The second question is, how do parasites disperse and what role do hosts play in dispersal? Beginning with, how do parasites obtain nutrition from host colonies? So from really early researchers of social parasites and Tetramorium atratulum, like Wheeler and Creighton, there is more of an assumption that these parasites are being fed and cared for by their host workers. But the direct evidence of this feeding of the parasites by these workers seems yet to be clarified. So, food is shared between ants in a process called trophallaxis, where liquid food is regurgitated from a donor ant and fed to a receiver ant. The food is stored and shared in a social stomach called a crop, and chemo-tactile signals from nestmates will stimulate the release of food flow. Over the course of a 6-day observation of a female parasite queen with 10 host workers, I observed 3 instances of trophallaxis between the parasite and the host worker. Here's a short clip showing the process of initiating and eliciting trophallaxis. And during this process of trophallaxis, you can see that they are still in contact, tapping with the antenna, and um, after trophallaxis commences, they're still initiating that contact and grooming. So the minimum feeding time that I observed was 20 seconds, and the max was 125. Oh, so the second question was, how do parasites disperse, and what role do hosts play in dispersal? And this is important because going back to the typical ant colony and how they function, we know that regular male and female sexuals will fly in their mating flights. So one result was worker-mediated dispersal. And in 39 recorded observations, I observed 59% of workers carrying a parasite that was immobile or presumably dead. In 36%, I observed parasites being carried, or sorry, 36% of female parasites dispersing on their own. And in 10.3%, I observed workers carrying live female parasites. Here I show a picture from one of the recordings where you can see a worker carrying a female parasite by the wings, but you can also see that her gaster is missing completely. So this is an example of a worker carrying a clearly dead parasite. And furthermore, after collecting, you can see here that her gaster is missing. Next, I have a short clip of a parasite being carried by a worker, but this time you can see that the parasite was picked up alive and dropped off alive. And the video goes by kind of fast, but the end where you can see her moving around is really where you want to pay attention. So additionally, following up with that last clip, I actually followed that parasite. And what I found was that she actually traveled a distance of 9.4 meters on foot. And she was actually climbing up on this cellar door um, after reaching across the driveway. Additionally, in some other self-dispersing female parasites, I observed them using their wings perhaps to skip around, but I did not observe any direct evidence that they use their wings to fly to the extent that typical asexuals do. I not only observed host workers carrying these parasites, but I also observed non-host workers carrying them. I observed both male and female parasites being carried. So, in conclusion, introduced ant species may provide opportunities for parasites and increase biodiversity in urban habitats. Tetramorium immigrans is an urban species that seems to be a disturbance specialist as opposed to other introduced species that may be more destructive and more of an economic burden. In my time observing them, I observed the ant guests that they keep in myrmecophiles, as well as seed dispersal, which they are generalists, so they feed on both insects and seeds. And so, as there's increasing urbanization and changes to the landscape, it's important to keep an eye out on species like Tetramorium immigrans and Tetramorium atratulum. Um, Lastly, thank you to everybody here. I would also like to acknowledge Kwapich Lab and my supervisor, who has not only inspired my interest in insects, but has led me to the discovery of this incredibly rare parasite. I'd also like to thank Hoon and Roman for supporting me throughout this project. And if anybody wants to reach out, I can be reached at sydneyhyde.int@gmail.com. Thank you, and thank you, Animal Live Behavior, for having me.
Thank you. Fascinating talk. A really great behavior that you could see. I think we are waiting for questions from the YouTube chat. In the meantime, I have a few of my own. So the pigmentation of the male parasite was quite distinct. Do you have any idea why it is so different from why it looks so unpigmented? Why does it look so different?
So, one of the conditions of what they call inquiline syndrome, which is described, I believe, by Wilson, is there are a set of features that parasites, and particularly extreme parasites, develop in order to really adapt to their hosts and succeed in exploiting them. And I think that that pale color and its general resemblance to a pupa can be part of that, like camouflage, in addition to chemical mimicry and chemo-tactile signals.
So the host species is quite visual, is it? That they rely on visual cues a lot.
I don't know if I can say that, but I think that sort of blending in would certainly help it not stick out so much. And I think their small size kind of goes with that too. The smaller you are, the less you are likely to be noticed.
Nice. I think the few messages on YouTube congratulating you for the talk. We don't have any questions yet. Um, I was wondering a bit about the behavior of these parasites. Of either the female or the male parasite, do they move close to the queen of the host nest, or do they always stay at the periphery? Have you observed what they do once they enter the nest?
I have not observed in the natural habitat. I've not observed any females successfully invading orphan colonies. There are a lot of researchers who have kind of observed that, and you usually see either acceptance or rejection, and it's kind of hard to tell either one. Um, but even with the artificial nest, where I kept a queen in an artificial nest, um, with the acceptance, you would see behaviors uh, like grooming, or maybe the workers will drag her inside a nest. Whereas with rejection, you might see that the workers don't let go of her, or tend to have a grip on her.
Interesting. Uh, so I think that's all the time we have for questions for you. So thank you for giving this fascinating talk. In case other questions are there for Sydney, please find her on the Discord channel and then she will be happy to answer them.